So I want to officially get started. I would like to welcome everyone. Again, my name is Mark Funkhauser, and I'm a site manager with the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. I'm helping to facilitate today's presentation with my colleague, Andrew Wachter. Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Wachter. As Mark said, I'm also a site manager with NCJFCJ. I've been with the council now for about 10 years. My role currently is primarily working with family courts around dependency case matters, those implementation sites that have taken on the task of implementing the enhanced resource guidelines as a project site. Our enhanced resource guidelines are the blueprint for best practices in child abuse and neglect cases. So I work primarily with those type of courts. My background prior to that was involved in delinquency matters, primarily probation and judicial matters related to data collection and continuous quality improvement. So I'm excited to join the webinar today. Hope for a lot of discussion around today's topic on prevention services.
Welcome to those of you who are just now joining. Please put yourselves on mute as you come in. The National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, with support from the State Justice Institute, or SJI, is hosting a series of 5 webinars titled Opioids and the Courts, Difficult Conversations. Future webinars will include conversations on intervention, harm reduction, reducing overdose and death, and recovery. This webinar is the first of 5, and we explore the challenges associated with prevention in delinquency and dependency. We also like to thank our primary funder and partner on this project, the State Justice Institute. SJI has a long history and through their mission of providing support to improve the quality of justice in state courts, along with fostering innovative, efficient solutions to common issues faced by the courts.
Mark?
Yep, I'd like to bring up the PowerPoint at this time and start us off. Everybody able to see that okay? Let's see, I'm gonna try to put it on. Okay, how about that?
Much better.
Okay, good, thank you. All right. So today's learning objectives, we're going to start off with understanding the role of courts in the development of an effective continuum of services and resources. We're also going to try to understand the value and the need for prevention services for juvenile and family courts. That might be a topic, sometimes you might think it's outside the court realm, but we're going to be talking about ways that we can utilize prevention, early intervention, you know, basically our diversion, as we would call it. And then we're going to apply these principles of prevention to juvenile and family court cases through our panelists today. So our facilitators today will be Andrew and I, and then we have our expert faculty, and we'll introduce them in just a minute. And then we'll have online participants. The purpose, we'll be able to crowdsource this, and you'll be able to ask questions or put comments in the chat. But we're looking to give you some creative ideas and strategies for effective solutions. We're talking about prevention and diversion in the context of both dependency and delinquency. We'll be highlighting examples that are specific to opioids and broader issues and concerns. We will explore the challenges associated with referring children and families to services in dependency and delinquency cases, and how courts and other agencies and service providers can work together to meet the needs and improve the lives of children and families. The value of prevention in the community cannot be overstated, especially as it relates to the challenges courts face when there is not a significant prevention network or available alternatives to prevent people from unnecessary deeper involvement in the system. We also must mention the integral connection between prevention and intervention and the rest of the continuum, and utilizing that is part of the effective work of the court. Courts, judges, and communities need resources and support as they do not operate in a vacuum, as we all know. They cannot do it alone. This comes through a serious focus on trust and community building, getting creative in the development, implementation, and sustainability of services, programs, and resources in the community. So today we'd like to welcome our panelists, and we're going to ask them, starting with Magistrate Judge Terry Frazizi. They are from Shelby County in Memphis, Tennessee. We're going to start with her and then move across and let them introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Terry Frazizi. I'm a magistrate judge at the Memphis and Shelby County Juvenile Court. I've been in this role for about 5 years. Before that, I was a prosecutor with the Shelby County District Attorney General's office, and I spent 22 years there, focusing efforts on juvenile prosecution, juvenile justice, and as a special victims unit prosecutor, the last 5 years I was there focusing on holding people who abuse children sexually and physically accountable. I'm happy to be here and to have this very, very important and timely discussion about the opioid crisis and the role of juvenile courts and providers in hopefully having this important conversation and being able to help our communities. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Erica?
Hello, everyone. My name is Erica Glenn. I am a Deputy Administrator at Memphis and Shelby County Juvenile Court, specifically in the Protective Services Department, where we deal with custody, dependency and neglect, visitation and contempt of those court orders. I consider this area of the Court Protective Services as the hub of filings in terms of working with Department of Children's Services, other agencies that provide services to families that are in need of resources and assistance. My background consists of, I've been a deputy administrator with the court for almost 3 years now. Prior to that, I was a supervisor in the same department for about 10 years. And before that, I have experience as a child case manager with Department of Children's Services with CPS investigations, and those are those investigations that come to the hotline alleging abuse and neglect. So I'm very happy to be here as a part of this conversation to provide my information and my knowledge base. So thank you.
All right, Shonda.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shonda Dunn, and I am a licensed clinical social worker from the University of Tennessee's Health Science Center at the Center for Developmental Disabilities. We are within the College of Medicine and the Department of Pediatrics. I am a full-time clinician specializing in trauma as well as race. I currently am a principal investigator on an Adverse Childhood Experiences Initiative grant program, as well as a provider and program manager for a child abuse and neglect prevention program. So I really do focus on providing interventions, assessments, as well as training future healthcare professionals at the university. At this time, I'm also a part-time faculty member at the University of Memphis within the social work department, and soon to be all but dissertation doctoral student at the University of Memphis as well.
Thank you, Shonda. Dr. Williams.
Hello, everyone. It's such an honor to be here. My name is Dr. Bernard Williams, and I am the Chief Probation Officer at Memphis and Shelby County Juvenile Court. That basically entails being involved with the Protective Services Division at our court and also the corrective services. That's all delinquency cases at our court as well. Of course, I have grew up in juvenile delinquency pretty much. I have worked as an in-home counselor, residential counselor before, and I worked at community programs. In addition to that, I worked in a detention center, and I worked as a counselor in the Children's Bureau, and then I got promoted up as a deputy administrator to work in disproportionate minority contact. I was appointed by Judge Dan H. Michael, who is now the president of the National Council. And now, of course, I got this position now as the Chief Probation Officer. And it's such an honor to be here and serve alongside you guys.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. I like that plug for Judge Michael as well. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Andrew Wachter now. He's going to talk about setting the stage.
Thanks, Mark. I wanted to just take a few minutes to set the stage on how this webinar series came to be and some of the work we're doing with the support of the State Justice Institute. NCJFCJ's initial proposal focused on addressing opioids and children in the courts by bringing courts together in person for some peer-to-peer learning and training. But of course, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to quickly reimagine the work that we were going to do. We settled on this idea of targeted resource mapping in select jurisdictions. Targeted resource mapping engages a small team led by a judge to identify substance use disorder services available to children and families in the community. And they focus along a continuum from prevention all the way to recovery. So far, we've engaged over 15 jurisdictions in that work. And while working with those teams, we at NCJFCJ started to have some conversations about what we were hearing from those teams and some of the challenges and barriers that exist naturally between the courts and the service providers that they work with and rely heavily on. These discussions led to the development of this webinar series on difficult conversations, those conversations that aren't always the easiest to have, but are a necessity to have in order to effectively serve children and families that come before the courts. As Mark mentioned, our webinar today is focused particularly on prevention. We have 4 more over the next 4 months, and those focus on intervention, harm recovery, preventing overdoses, and last recovery. But they'll all focus on some difficult conversations in those realms. So we're happy that all of you could join us today to start the topic on prevention. Mark, if you could move the slide.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit more about what we mean when we're talking about prevention. In our context, prevention strategies aim to educate and support individuals or communities to prevent something. In this case, what we're talking about today is preventing delinquency, preventing substance use disorders, and preventing removal of children in dependency matters. Prevention strategies can be implemented in a variety of settings. We see them in schools, in communities, all across jurisdictions. And I think, a robust continuum of services is absolutely critical to the success of children and families that come before the courts. A healthy continuum of services can mean the difference between an informal and formal processing for a youth in a delinquency matter, having the availability of a diversion option, for instance, or in some cases doing nothing at all, a hands-off approach. And it can also mean the difference between keeping families together or removing children in a dependency matter. So I want to start this difficult conversation today with our panelists around what role do you see judges and other stakeholders have in the development of prevention and diversion services in the community, recognizing that they are so important. And if we can start with Judge Frazizi, that would be great, perhaps.
So I see my role as a juvenile magistrate as twofold. One is my role in the community and the influence that I can wield in the community. And then my second role is my role in a courtroom setting. And it's a different type of influence that can be wielded there. My community role is what each of you and what I, after years and years of working in these fields, you develop a network of people who will, so to speak, go to the mat with you. And that's how you put together your team of people that you fight these issues with in a courtroom and outside of a courtroom. So when you go to lasso this continuum of services that we're talking about, you draw on your resources in the community to put together people who are as devoted to the cause as you are. The role that a judge can wield in the courtroom is very, very different. Although I personally, and I think I speak for everyone here, I believe that everything that we devote to being tough on juvenile delinquency and being tough on dependency and abuse cases, we have to equally put the prevention and diversion services out there in equal measure. Having the ability to separate a family, having an ability to remove a delinquent child from a family, those are awesome responsibilities and not something we take lightly. And they are also, quite frankly, huge incentives. And so what we bring to a courtroom setting is the ability to to have that as a incentive, as a carrot, so to speak, in order to motivate people to take advantage of the opportunity to finally take advantage of community resources, keep their family unified, improve their circumstances, fight addiction, and bring their family to a better place of wholeness and wellness.
Thank you. I really like the part about mentioning that role outside of the courtroom itself, that in the community, the convening power that you have to hold meetings and get people to the table. And in many cases, in what we're talking about here, is getting those service providers to the table to have conversations about what might be missing in the continuum of services. How do we fill some of those gaps? Anybody else on the panel want to weigh in on this role of developing services?
I would just like, my name is Erica Glenn. I would just like to add, in addition to that, I think what is very key when we're trying to strategize and think of prevention services is very important not to duplicate services. I think so many times there are so many agencies that are involved with the family. A lot of services overlap, so communication is very key to prevent duplication of services. Yeah, that's just very important. The duplication of services prevent from family kind of keep reiterating the same thing or the same issue from agency to agency when we're looking at how to provide effective services for a family to become whole and successful.
Great, thank you.
And I would add, Andrew, that it's very important when we're talking about stakeholders having an opportunity to develop. That's the key phrase when we start talking about developing. You got to think about that cross-system collaboration and what are the gaps that's in the system. You know, there could be a gap for kids who have sexually related charges or domestic assault charges. And when people want to, you know, of course, partner with the court, it's very crucial that, you know, not only do they want to partner with us, but we want evidence-based practices and we want the best services possible for our clients. And when we're mapping the resources, it's very critical that we get the best people at the table and not exclude the district attorney's office, and also include the attorneys, the defense attorneys, in that shaping format to make sure that the family has the most buy-in. So when we're thinking about ways to improve the system and have diversion services, it's very crucial and to have everybody bought into the plan for the family.
Thank you.
And, you know, I do want to add, you know, as a, you know, clinical provider and also a stakeholder, I definitely think that the acknowledgement of moving more into this public health, social service approach where we really are moving from this individual deficit-based framework to a strengths-based community framework where we're providing services and reaching in to ensure that we have preventative services that are available. And I think that this really kind of shows the fact that we all have a part in really minimizing risk and the creation of services. And we should all essentially be trying to wrap our hands and our arms around the community to provide those services. And one thing that Dr. Williams said was, you know, when we're thinking about this, you know, collaboration with different agencies, you know, the University of Tennessee, we're a very large system, and we focus on integrating science and practice together. And I think this is where the university comes in to play a really big role within juvenile court systems and community-based systems, is the fact that we are focused in research and delivery, where we can go and partner with other large systems like the juvenile court and school systems to provide that evidence-based framework, and also helping to ensure that everyone has a seat at the table when we're talking about preventative services.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to mention there's a comment in the chat, and I'm hoping that maybe Judge Frazizi can weigh in on this. There's a comment that judges need to be aware of some of the fine lines as to judicial roles in the community as delineated by the Code of Judicial Conduct. I liked your example earlier that we talked about, the orchestra example, if you want to. I think that might be a good way to sort of weigh in on this topic.
Well, yeah, I think that judges do have to be mindful of that. We always have to maintain our objectivity, and we always have to maintain our professionalism. We can't do anything that gives an appearance of impropriety or that we favor one side or one position over another. The community providers are the musicians, and a judge can be an orchestra leader. But you still have, we're still people, right? We're still human beings. And it's hard to not get excited and not get passionate when someone who's been on your caseload for a year and a half gets sober, gets a job, gets a house, and gets to have sole custody of their child back. And these are everyday examples that we have and that we get to share in. And we are the families, we get to know the families that we serve. We get to know these kids. Being in the field in one role or another for 31 years, it's not unusual. It was not unusual for me as a prosecutor in adult court to see children that I had prosecuted as juveniles. It was adults that I'd prosecuted as juveniles. It was not unusual when I came back to juvenile court as a magistrate to have to recuse myself because there was someone on my caseload that I'd prosecuted. And so you have these opportunities in the community. Every role that you ever have leads you to where you're supposed to be. At least that's the way I see it. And I told these guys when we met to talk about this webinar that if I achieve my career goal long term, my goal is to work myself out of a job, for there no longer to be delinquent children and babies born addicted to meth and fentanyl. So I think that it is important that we are passionate about what we do both in and out of the courtroom. And I do think it's important to keep that fine line between and our ethical boundaries while still showing up every day in a courtroom as a human being. And it's okay to be excited and passionate about this work. And I believe it's our duty to use our connections in the community to bring together people to bring better services to families.
Great, thank you. And I'll point out another comment from Judge Lynn Edwards regarding part of juvenile court judges' responsibility is to work off the bench to promote collaboration between service providers and government agencies, and that it's ethical conduct, and has been the position of NCJFCJ for decades. And that is also articulated, as I mentioned earlier, in our enhanced resource guidelines. And it is a big principle that when we're working with courts, that we try to advocate for. Mark, can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So I want to turn to the audience now to ask them a couple of questions. What ways are your courts exercising leadership to ensure adequate prevention services in your community? Anybody that's on that has a couple of ideas, feel free to chat them in the chat box. Myself and my colleagues will be looking through the chat for some of your comments that we can raise to the larger group. But I'm interested in hearing about unique ways that you might be holding meetings, working with providers in some way to ensure that you have all the services necessary to serve the children and families that come before your court. There's a comment from Barbara that says, I believe we cannot effectively do this work without being passionate about the work. I think many of the folks on today's webinar would also agree with that statement. If anybody has any interesting ways. So there's a comment, we always have a judge or a magistrate at our Safe Baby stakeholders meetings and try to identify areas of need. That's great. Looking at additional services for your Safe Baby court is always important.
I also think it's important to look outside the realm of traditional services. So for example, we always look to mental health providers, A&D providers, trauma-focused therapy providers, but to also look at things in the community, jobs programs, coordinating with people in the criminal justice system who lead reentry efforts, partnerships with schools and community colleges for education and job readiness programs. Someone came up with an idea that one problem is transportation for a lot of the families we serve. So to go into the community and look for providers who can provide free vehicle care for a year while a family's in a program. Looking at stores that could provide diaper service for a year while a family's in a program. So really going deep into the community and asking people to step up and help in whatever way that they can.
Thank you. I think that that's important to think about. Not only gaps in services are not necessarily always just the service themselves, but the barriers to getting to that service. And so when you talk about things like transportation, that's also something that can be considered. Judge Edwards added that they have a local conference bringing together service providers and stakeholders in the juvenile court. I've heard of these types of meetings where they're, semi-annual provider meetings, sort of a show and tell, if you will, of all the providers getting together that are in the community and talk about what services they provide. Amy says, acknowledging and using data to address disproportionality and disparity in decision-making. Using data is always important for decision-making, and so having access to that data is important. And I'm glad that they're using it to look at some of the decisions that they're making in the court. Stephanie indicates, I'm a court designated specialist and I work in pre-court services to provide community resources to help the youth through the school system, community-based service, mental health counseling, as well as mentors for them to be paired with to do things outside the home. That's great. Mark, I'll go ahead and turn the next slide over to you if you want to continue our discussion.
All right, thank you. Yeah, right now we're going to be talking about delinquency, prevention and diversion in delinquency. And I've been working with Memphis and Shelby County for seemed like a couple of years, at least a year and a half. And I know you all work out front in the community and have some programs and things. But when we think about prevention and diversion and delinquency, a lot of times
Mark's on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry. What happened there? I'm not sure what happened there. Did you hear any of that? All right. So in prevention and diversion and delinquency, youth are referred to prevention and diversion that are often low risk and first-time offenders. Screening and assessment can help reduce unnecessary court involvement. One of the goals is to prevent young people and families from going deeper into the system. So we're going to turn to our panel now and talk about how do you know when to handle a case informally or when to move to a more formal court involvement. And that may include actually utilizing diversion and prevention even outside the informal setting. So we'll start with, let's start with Judge Frazizi.
Well, I don't know about y'all, but I have Erica and Bernard. And so it makes it easy when you have people like that backing you up. Really, something only makes it to me if a lot of the prevention and diversion services have already been exhausted. So I'm going to say this briefly, and then I'm going to turn to Bernard and Erica and Shonda to talk about some of the things that they've done. But when I was the lead prosecutor at juvenile court for 11 years, I don't think either Bernard or Erica was here. We had a lot of diversion and prevention programs, but not nearly the scope and scale that we do now. And so usually I only get the case in court now if it's something that would be a felony if it were an adult. There's a school-based program. There are a lot of detention and assessment tools that screen cases out for diversion and prevention programs. What I would like to see more of going forward is more of a partnership between catching the child in the dependency and neglect stages before they ever get to the point where they're committing delinquent acts and the family is already in a more at-risk situation. I'd like to see more of a collaboration between addressing dependency as a necessary part of delinquency. And with that, I'll let Bernard brag on some of the programs that they've brought to the court in the last decade or so.
Absolutely. I would say one of the ways that we have been innovative at the court is through objective decision-making tools based upon the data that we saw. We basically had people making decisions, subjectively across the system based on the points of contact. Right at the first point of contact, we know it is contact youth has with law enforcement, especially in the realm of delinquency. And oftentimes it could be a parent in the realm of dependency can have contact with a DCS worker or even law enforcement, again, some type of form of government. Well, at the very first point of contact, we put our youth service counselors in the community at the police precincts with Memphis Police Department. Instead of blaming officers, and which I used to hear a lot of, officers are doing this, well, we're not transporting, we're not going to pick up the kids. I used to hear people at the court say, but now we have our counselors, juvenile court seasoned, experienced counselors at 3 of our police precincts, and actually our busiest precincts, and they're housed there, and law enforcement can partner with the court in such a unique way. Instead of writing an arrest report on a parent or the child, they can contact that juvenile service counselor who has a zip code-based resource directory that knows all of the resources that's in the community, and they work in that community every day. And as a matter of fact, one of our counselors lives in that community, and they're fully bought into making that community whole. Therefore, anytime law enforcement calls, or even a neighbor or victim can call the police precinct, the counselor can respond and connect them to services. And one of those unique service providers that we partner with is a restorative justice mediation program. And domestic assault in Memphis is one of our top charges. And instead of us having law enforcement pick that child up and bring them to our detention center, we're able to connect the family and even the victim with someone who's going to mediate the situation so that we can connect them back to services without ever having a police report done. So those are some of the unique things we've done that we've had to establish in the community, but at the same time, create the policies and strengthening those relationships in the community.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Yeah, being invested and owning, and even living in the community, sometimes it helps people to be more aware of that. I remember when I was in probation, some people would say, well, or even somebody moving from outside in, these aren't our, our kids or whatever. I'm like, well, they're living here. These are our kids, and we're invested in trying to help these children and families, So Shonda, let's go to you next, please.
Yeah, so I really kind of want to focus on the screening and assessment portion in the sense that, first off, there's a strong difference between a screener and an assessment in our clinical world, where a screener is only used to provide a map. It's not necessarily used to, find a diagnosis of some sort. And an assessment takes it a step further, where we're able to find a diagnosis and we're able to have a better direction of where families can go and where children are able to go. But I think that something that's really important about utilizing assessments and screeners is that they provide that balance between subjective and objective thinking, where we really do need to have a balance of both, especially when we're relying on service providers like mental health providers, behavioral health providers, counselors, it's going to be important to have that balance there, because that I know the juvenile court uses an assessment that, you know, rules out things based off of cultural relevancy. It goes into risk, trauma background, and we really need to know those things when we're determining how do we move a case, how do we know when this isn't the right intervention or this isn't the right service for a family. And the assessments are helpful, but also, again, using providers and using their expertise is going to be something that is a pivotal in this case.
Thank you, Shonda. It reminds me of how caseworkers and probation officers and providers are the eyes and ears for the court, and the judge can only make a decision based upon the information that they have. And also having those tools and being able to combine that with your experience and your intuition with regard to knowing children and families. And the better that you know them, the better decisions that are made. So thank you for that. Erica, did you have anything you wanted to add for this?
No, I was just going
question?
to add, when Doc talked about the liaisons being housed in the different precincts, the unique thing about that is when they encounter a family or a situation and they have some dependency and neglect issues, because we have that communication, that open line of communication, there are often times that they would kind of reach out to us and say, hey, this is the scenario this family is presenting. It may initiate with delinquency issues, but after they've been able to establish rapport with the family and talk about some things, there are clearly some dependency issues. So it's a great network for them to reach out to us, and then we kind of, I guess, streamline or direct them to the dependency type of resources that are available. So I think it just works hand in hand. And
yeah. Thank you.
Mark, I want to add one more piece. The Mount Moriah station, I looked at some of their data, and I think even the police precinct now, it's called Austin P. They were averaging about 150,000 calls per year. Based upon the math that I calculated, that's approximately about 19 calls, almost 20 calls per minute. And if you scale it back to the Charlie and Delta shift, that indicates that there's an overload of calls coming in to officers, and their response time with Memphis Police Department, I mean, if you go respond to one call, you got 18 more calls waiting on you. You got to think about that. You know, they can't sit on the couch and talk to the child and family. So by us, you know, getting involved with law enforcement in a proactive way, it gives them another tool to use in the community and keep the kids from ever being transported, and not only getting transported, but we're able to lay our eyes on some of these families in their own environment. And when we look at them in their own environment, you're going to notice some siblings that are on their way to the system. And at that point, we can say, you know what, we've got to get the Department of Children's Services here. This family may not even have health insurance. Let's get them health insurance and start connecting, not just the stuff that you know, normal paperwork can see, but some of the things that we can build relationships with these people in their natural environments and get them connected.
Thank you very much.
Can I want to add to this really quickly.
Yes.
So the program, you know, that they're talking about, it's also really important in another really great way. And in the spirit of difficult conversations, I want to say that Shelby County, Memphis Shelby County has a historic mistrust of law enforcement and the court system. And when you have a program like this that takes these counselors and places them into the law enforcement setting and the community setting, the person and environment setting, it's an attempt to rebuild that relationship and that trust with the community where this has been lost before. And this is why this program is also really helpful, because you know, there's the acknowledgement that not everything is perfect and that we do have to create some type of change that moves beyond service delivery, but also acknowledges a past where we really do have to work to build up that trust again. And that's another reason why this program is so important in Shelby County.
Very good. Thank you. That trust and community relationship building is critical when it comes to, and also the way we view, you know, children and families and treat them, you know, with dignity and respect as well. So we're going to move on to the audience. Andrew, if you can catch me up with the chat, I'm unable to see the chat quite as well. But the audience, we're going to ask you now, what innovative approaches are you using to divert youth, including maybe also referring them back, you know, to community services where they're not actually in the system, or maybe doing less or nothing at all. So any information in the chat that we need to bring in? I'm not able to actually see that quite as well. Let me see.
There's nothing in the chat yet, but I'm, you know, as Mark said, I'm kind of interested in these unique approaches that you might be doing in your own jurisdictions to either sort of take a hands-off approach in some cases. I'm particularly interested in some of the front loading, if you will, in terms of moving the services upstream. Are there any police diversion programs that you are happening in your jurisdictions? Early interventions to avoid some of that formal court processing or to further penetration into the system. Feel free to type them in the chat just like we did before. So Joni is asking, does anyone have a crossover youth program? We use that to help better address needs of our cases where children are in both child welfare and delinquency systems. That's a great approach. It is a well-researched model that's supported by evidence. Any other jurisdictions using that or a similar approach to coordinate services around those youth that end up in both a delinquency and dependency system?
I would note that one of the trademarks of the council and the enhanced resource guidelines is the one family, one judge concept, and when that's possible, to have the same judge working with families across those different types of cases, and that way they not only get to know them well, but they also know dispositions in other cases, and they're able to make better decisions, you know, across, and also with regard to providing services, not making sure there's no gaps and overlaps. So, any other thoughts before we move on there? Yeah.
So Judge Edwards reminded us that it is actually the law in California to approach those, to coordinate services for youth in both of those systems. Allegheny County here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania uses the crossover youth practice model. Aaron in Santa Clara County, California, they use a DIY unit which addresses youth both in probation and dependency court.
I also see Rodney Prentice Jr. We are a tribal court. We have several community-based programs that utilize culture and language and that are seeing some success in early stages. So that sounds good. And then Joni Raymond, I think that helps us catch youth before they end up deeper in either system. We are also using a truancy diversion council. So thank you.
And I also see Sabrina Sweet from Washoe County there in Nevada. They use both the crossover youth practice model and one family, one judge to increase collaboration.
All right, Dr. Williams says he's learning as well, so that's why we're here. Thank you. All right, I think we'll move on to the next question, Andrew, if you're ready.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead and move the slide. I wanted to talk a little bit about prevention in another way, and we're talking in this case preventing the removal of children in dependency matters. We know that the opioid epidemic and other substance use disorders have a tremendous impact on the courts and stakeholders. It's no secret to any of us on this webinar, I'm sure. We all see caseloads increasing. We all see a large number of families coming to the attention of dependency courts as a result of parental substance use. We also know that the goal is to keep families together and prevent removal whenever possible. But we also know that, as we kind of started talking about initially in our first question, that a healthy continuum of services, particularly prevention services, is critical, but we know that there are gaps in many times, in many instances. So I think, the question to the panel, this difficult conversation is, how do you know when to move from prevention services to filing a petition for removal in these dependency cases? In the end, how do you know enough prevention has been utilized before you take the next step? So I'll turn to the panel first to address that, and then we'll talk to the audience a little bit about some of the working on.
Okay, I can kind of start that off. For me, of course, first and foremost, we have to ensure that the child is safe, regardless. But once that's been secured, once that's been determined, I think for me, the ultimate thing would be when services are exhausted, we have to allow people, the family, to identify what their barriers are. And we have to allow them a chance to have a plan in place with the help of agencies. And it can't be cookie cutter. It has to be specific to that family's needs. I think it's very important that there's that us as stakeholders look to the family to make sure that there are family supports to see what's out there. I think it's very important for us to communicate and to communicate often. There should be time frames as well. We don't want the child to suffer while parents or caretakers are trying to get things right, but we have to allow them time to attempt to make it right. And that can only be determined when barriers are identified, when family supports have been identified and they've been exhausted. At that point, I think that's when the Department of Children's Services needs to file a petition. The court steps in to take an overview. But I think, we have to allow the family to identify what those barriers are, work with them to identify the barriers, come up with a collective plan that's specific to that family's needs, and assess it to kind of see. But ultimately, of course, it's the safety of the child that's important. So to answer your question, I can't just give a blanket time frame because it is a case-by-case basis, and everybody's situation is different. So communication is very effective, often communication.
Yeah, thank you, Erica. I think your focus there on including the family and asking them about what their barriers are is extremely important in this discussion, because rather than using cookie cutter sort of services or not acknowledging some of the barriers that the individuals may have, may end up being a recipe for setting them up for failure in some cases. So I appreciate that focus on including the family. Shonda or Judge, did you want to add in here?
So for the movie fans out there, if you saw the Indiana Jones movie, the one with Sean Connery, where at the end he steps out and takes that leap of faith and the path appears. In cases like this, so you have this chasm between a leap of faith and it working, and then as a judge, your worst nightmare coming true, and you don't do a removal and a child is hurt or dies or witnesses a parent's overdose death. And so it's important to take those leaps of faith. Every time that you take one and it works, it develops that sense. Every time that you take one, and I'll say I here, every time I take one and it doesn't work, you've got heartbreak to overcome. And so the things that we do are life altering. Lives are at stake. And so we can't minimize the importance of that. That being said, there are many programs that I did not even know about 5 years ago. There are many programs where parents and children can stay together in a residential program with their child, be monitored. And one in particular here in Shelby County that comes to mind is through the Salvation Army. And the directors of that program, they know us now. They come to court with their clients. They know the kids, and they cannot remove that child from that facility. That director, those counselors, they have a home setting there, like an apartment, where the child and the family, usually a mom, can be together, but they cannot remove that child from that residential setting. They're subjected to drug testing. There's a saturation of A&D services, education and job readiness services, but they're given this opportunity to work on themselves and also not be parted from their child at the same time. When those programs work, man, that's a beautiful thing. And I think that I hope that everyone can have some of those and that we can develop more of those. The first time I ever took a chance with one of the families in that Salvation Army program, I was as scared could ever be. But when it worked, you know, that I've got what I need to keep going for another 5-10 years.
I'm glad you brought up the specific example around keeping children with parents while receiving treatment. You know, I was curious about other approaches to do that. It's important that, you know, to keep the mother and child bond if, to the extent possible, and still receive treatment in those settings. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think that that's a necessary sort of conversation that's natural to this discussion around trying to keep families together rather than filing for a petition for removal. Shonda, did you want to add something here?
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback off of what Erica was saying. You know, as a social worker, we're always thinking in the best interest of the child, but it's, you know, we have to admit that addiction and substance abuse is something that's very difficult to overcome unless we have some really amazing supports in place and we really do kind of understand the pathology of these disorders. And with that being said, you know, relying on a whole team of individuals and making that decision is going to be very influential in making that decision. A couple of things that we look at as social workers, the progress of a client, their willingness to change, not just exhausting services, but what services were available in the community and were the appropriate recommendations given. So perhaps a recommendation was given to a family that cannot be done in our area. It's something, you know, there was, I think I recently had a recommendation for in-person parenting classes. And I looked at the recommendation and I'm like, who's doing in-person parenting classes right now? But that's what the judge had wanted. And it was difficult to kind of say, okay, so if they don't get this, you know, if they don't meet this within 3 months, what happens? We can't really determine when a service provider is going to provide these services. So really kind of looking around at what we have now and trying to make the best decision possible. And also looking at the services and saying, okay, well, this seems more like a realistic expectation for our families and making that decision. But it's not an easy one. It's not an easy one as a clinician to make that decision, to decide when do we discharge someone, when do we say someone is safe to re-enter the community. These are very difficult decisions, but it shouldn't just rely on one person solely. It should definitely be the reliance on a team of individuals and many different brains to kind of make these decisions.
Thank you, Shonda. I want to ask a related question that I think is also a very difficult conversation to have. And that is, do you think that parents who are using substances can still be active parents? Can they be a good parent if they're still using substances? Because I think it's an important question that often has to be answered in the context of these dependency matters. And I'm curious where people think about this.
So I'd like to take that first. I think that there is, we all have this humanistic portion about ourselves where as parents, where we want to be great parents and we want to work in the best interest of our children. I think that that is something that comes natural and to many of us. And so the use of substances doesn't necessarily make us a bad parent. I think what happens is it kind of clouds that judgment. It clouds the ability to actually be an active parent because sometimes the world is revolving around substance use. And so not necessarily bad parents, but if we were to eliminate the use, if we were to provide treatment, then we can look at that and realize deep down, I do believe that parents do have this innate need and want to be the best parents that they can and provide for their children.
Thank you, Shonda. Anybody else from the panel want to weigh in on that topic?
I will weigh in just very briefly. I put an article in by Davis and his colleagues, and they really mentioned something that's crucial. And they estimated approximately about 11.8 million people, 12 years of age and older, 4.4% misuse opioids in the past year. And you got to think about that. And it even says 42,000 people dying from opioid overdose in 2016 alone. I would say it depends on what is going on. I think Erica spoke about safety of a child. You know, if we can prevent that child from being, dying of an overdose, because sometimes you're just laying drugs around without a lockbox and not having the proper protocol could cost someone their life, and that child could actually die from it. And as a matter of fact, I want to quote something, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but we have one of the worst infant mortality rates in Memphis and Shelby County than you do in some third world countries. And a lot of it is linked to kids being born with fentanyl in their systems. I know Judge Frazizi can speak on that a little bit more. But not only that, some other things that's drug related that is causing it's causing children to have this lack of safety, and they're dying at very young ages. So it's very important that the safety of the child is crucial. And although I do believe that they can be good parents with the proper treatment, but the safety of that child is going to be very paramount.
Great. Thanks, Doctor. I think we're going to move now to final thoughts. We've got a few minutes left. I'll note that there are 2 links that are on this slide that Adria has also tossed in the chat box. Those are some further reading, some from the Department of Health and Human Service, another on from the National Center on Substance Abuse and Child Welfare. I thought they had some great links and small briefs on that were easily digestible on this topic, so I wanted to link them there. We also have a link in the chat box for the evaluation for today's webinar. Adria has put it in there as well. We'll copy it again in there. But in the meantime, if we can go to the panelists, we'll start with Judge in terms of final thoughts for today.
So I will leave you with this. When I became a magistrate, the very first conference that I went to, it was a state conference. The speaker was a doctor who had overcome substance use himself. And he gave a very compelling story and was very open to really direct questions and having a difficult conversation. And we asked him, what have you learned? What do you suggest? And he said something that has stuck with me. Every single case that's involved substance use. Since then, he looked at us and he said, when you deal with these people, when you deal with these parents, he said, just don't shame them. Just don't shame them. And that, I guess that's kind of a Southern thing, but I've tried to make a point to distinguish with families that addiction is something that's a medical condition just like cancer or diabetes that has to be dealt with as an illness and a disease. It's not a character flaw necessarily. It might mean that you can't safely take care of yourself or your children right now. But the way we want to approach this is that everyone wants you to win here. Everyone wants this to work. Everyone wants for your life to get better, for your children's lives to get better. So that's what I try to remember in approaching it. No one whose kids are in a juvenile justice system wants to be here. You're either here because your child's being removed or is in trouble with the law. No one wants to be here. And so I think if we just start there and not shame folks and just embrace the opportunity for change that it offers us.
Thank you, Judge. And unfortunately, it looks like we're out of time for the rest of the folks to add in their final thoughts, but we certainly appreciate you all on the panel joining us this afternoon for these conversations around prevention. Again, there is a link at the bottom of the chat right now for an evaluation of our webinar. There's also a link that we just tossed in there. The registration for the other 4 webinars, which are one a month, that registration is open as well, so you can register there. We hope to see all of you there, and thank you very much and have a great afternoon. Take care.